On the 4th of February 2006, crowds gathered outside the Phil Sports Stadium in the city of Pasig in the Philippines. There was palpable excitement in the air. Some people had been queuing for days already, but they were now joined first by hundreds of others and then by thousands. They were waiting for the filming of a much-loved TV game show to begin. A game show in which, if they were lucky, some of them might be able to participate with a chance of winning incredible, valuable prizes. That day, however, nobody would participate in the game show. Nobody would win any prizes, and dozens of the people waiting excitedly outside would never make it out of the stadium alive. Wowowee was a popular Philippine variety show which featured a range of different segments, most of which had some kind of game show mechanic. Contestants were usually members of the audience or pre-selected members of the public, and when participating, they stood to win some quite significant high-value prizes. These included large quantities of cash, vehicles, and even houses or plots of land. Games included singing competitions, tests of balance and dexterity, and high-stakes games of bluffing or misdirection. One segment saw a randomly selected audience member given the chance to enter a wind tunnel and attempt to seize as much cash as possible out of the air, while another saw contestants competing to identify and sing along to songs based on a small sample played on a keyboard. The show aired most days of the week with an intense filming schedule. Many shows would be filmed early in the morning for broadcast around lunchtime that same day. The producers of Wowowee were adamant that their show aimed to help and uplift Filipinos. And indeed, in a country where the average salary was approximately 19,000 Philippine pesos, the equivalent of around $340, prizes that had a value of 10,000 Philippine pesos or $165 at the low end, and 1 million Philippine pesos or $16,500 at the high end, were considered life-changing and enormously desirable. At the same time, the show faced some challenges, with critics accusing it of exploiting its audience and manufacturing entertainment from the desperation of poor, poorly educated, or desperate people. This ongoing controversy did not prevent the show from thriving. Over the course of its first year, the show was routinely watched by 20% of the viewing public. However much money and however many valuable prizes it gave away, it generated still more in sponsorships, business deals, and ad revenue for its creators. On the 4th of February 2006, a special episode to celebrate the first full year of Wowowee was due to be filmed at the Phil Sports Complex in the city of Pasig. The Phil Sports Complex is comprised of a number of facilities including a football and athletics stadium, a basketball arena, a swimming centre, and a beach volleyball facility. It was often used to host large sporting events and concerts attended by large crowds. On the day of filming, a very large crowd was expected. Indeed, the show planned to use the indoor basketball arena at the complex for the majority of its actual filming, but would also be making use of the adjacent Phil Sports Football and Athletics Stadium as a viewing area to allow the many audience members who would not be able to fit into the basketball arena to watch and participate in the show. Excitement levels were high, and some prospective audience members had been camping outside the stadium for several days to ensure that they got a seat. In the early hours of the morning on the day of filming, thousands more arrived, until by 6 a.m. a crowd of nearly 30,000 was congregated at the entrance to the stadium. While many of those waiting there were keen to watch, they were also excited about the possibility of being picked to participate in a game show segment, or raffle. Thus, when organisers began to admit the abnormally large crowd, there was a sense of anxiety among those at the back about whether they would gain admittance or not. This anxiety was heightened when the waiting crowd saw organisers handing out a limited number of entry tickets to those at the front of the crowd, and then exacerbated still further when a network staff member announced that only those waiting underneath a particular covered walkway area would be eligible for selection to participate in one of the games with a very large cash prize. According to some survivors, there may also have been people in the crowd joking about the possibility of there being a bomb. A combination of these factors caused those at the back of the crowd to surge forward, pressing against those in front of them. Those at the front of the crowd were pushed against metal gates at the entrance to the stadium, which stadium security were attempting to keep closed to prevent an uncontrolled rush of people entering. These gates soon gave way, spilling people onto a downward-sloping driveway that led to the entrance. Dozens of people at the front of the crowd, pushed and shoved by those behind, lost their balance and fell, with further waves of people forced either to walk over them or to fall themselves and risk being crushed by the crowd. One survivor later said, "People at the back of the line were pushing, not knowing there were already people dead, lying on the ground in front." After several frantic minutes, the crush eased. Hundreds of people lay injured at the entrance to the stadium, many of them unresponsive. The emergency services were called, and an urgent evacuation of the injured to hospital began. With hundreds of people seriously injured, the operation would take hours. As police officers and paramedics worked, many bystanders continued to mill around the area, unsure what had happened and whether the filming would be cancelled. These crowds made it difficult for ambulances to directly access the scene. Meanwhile, within the stadium, thousands of audience members who had gained admission learned of what had happened outside. The host, comedian Willie Revelame, delivered the news, saying through tears, "All we wanted to do was to help and bring cheer." Later, he led the crowd in a minute of silent prayer as bodies were removed from the ground outside. Ultimately, 73 people lost their lives in the crush, and a further 400 suffered injuries that required hospital treatment. In the aftermath of the disaster, a task force was created to investigate what had caused the crush and ascertain why it had been so deadly. This group was known as Task Force Ultra, after the previous name of the PhilSports Stadium. After investigating the scene and interviewing survivors and witnesses, a timeline of events was assembled. It was clear that there had been insufficient communication between the ABS-CBN TV network, who organised the event, and the city authorities. It should have been obvious before the crush occurred that a dangerous situation existed, as the stadium could accommodate only 10,000 people, and the crowd waiting outside was, by most estimates, comprised of at least 30,000 people. Thereafter, poor organisation and a failure to implement robust crowd control had created the conditions for the crush to take place. The host of the show, comedian Willie Revelame, was cleared of any wrongdoing. Despite being the figurehead of the show, his responsibilities did not extend to the organisation of security or crowd control. However, 17 ABS-CBN network executives were identified as being responsible to some degree. The process of criminally prosecuting these individuals began, but was repeatedly delayed by legal challenges and points of order. In 2008, several executives were cleared. Proceedings against the others carried on until at least 2014 without any notable progress towards clearing or conviction. In the meantime, Wowowee was briefly absent from the nation's screens before returning as normal. On the first anniversary of the disaster, the latter half of the show was dedicated to reflections and a moment of silence for those who had lost their lives 1 year ago. Thereafter, Wowowee continued to broadcast for several years, still capturing a high percentage of the television-watching audience in the Philippines. The show was so successful that it ran a number of special episodes, including tours to locations abroad. It finally concluded in 2010. Host Willie Revelame went on to participate in 2 successor shows, Wowowilly and Wowowin, both very similar in format to Wowowee. The latter of these ran until 2023. Many participants in all 3 of these shows, over the course of many years, won prizes that could be considered life-changing. But equally, On one particular day in 2006, hundreds of hopeful contestants, some of them seeking a route out of lifelong poverty, had their lives changed in a way they had not expected, and from which there could be no recovery.